Welcome to the Continuous Improvement Podcast. I'm Devin Bedoni from Lichen Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen from Austere Manufacturing.
And we're here to talk about lean manufacturing, Toyota Production System stuff in the small shop, young shop environment.
Yeah.
So to lead us off this week, I had the idea of discussing decoupling processes. What I mean by that specifically is decoupling dependent processes in time, putting that in the context of a single piece flow production system. That essentially means adding inventory.
Right.
And so if you look at it strictly from a lean manufacturing standpoint, that's not something you want to have.
The opposite.
Yeah, it is the opposite. However, I think the caveat in every lean manufacturing principle is that it needs to, that flow is the underlying principle.
Yeah.
Below all of these things. And that if you're not achieving flow, then you need to add back inventory back in or add steps back in to achieve that. Do you feel like that's a consistent thing?
I guess my feeling is that, or my understanding is sort of that the goal is to link processes so that parts don't sit between processes.
Yeah.
And that lowering inventories is a way of highlighting or, elevating to your awareness kind of what the issues are.
Yeah.
And then, if it becomes a problem, basically add inventory. But really, that's not the answer. The answer is solve the problem that was sort of highlighted. But I don't know how to balance that and making money.
There's that. I just feel like in every case study, there's always a caveat. The classic one in the Toyota way was
the gutter company.
The gutter company, yeah. They need all the gutters one time a year.
Right.
So to maintain a balanced workload, et cetera, they built all that inventory.
Right.
Anyway, so the context that I am finding this in, and it makes sense that our process is not super polished.
Right.
But I have always, in the past, I kind of always approached things from sort of the prototype shop standpoint, because that's kind of how I started, where it was like a machine comes open, then you program the part, and then you set up the part, and then you run the part. And now that I have more people in the shop and we're trying to keep machines running more of the time, obviously that's not an efficient way to go. Machines sit a lot if you do it that way. So I'm working on sort of decoupling the setup, the running, the setup, and the programming, i.e. separating them in time, adding inventory so that there's stuff waiting, essentially. And I could see how this could work back towards just having it ready just in time.
Right.
The CAM program and the tools and et cetera, just in time.
Right.
And I just thought it was an interesting lens that we could maybe put on a few different aspects of the process. It kind of ties into what you were talking about last week with your multiple Kanban cards for paint, and how we kind of just analyze these processes and figure out exactly how much is an appropriate amount of. Right. And then the other thing that I think is interesting is sort of the human aspect of it, where I have found that I'm a much more capable programmer when I'm not under the pressure of getting it on the machine.
Right.
And in essence, I'm actually making it a little less efficient, kind of like what you were talking about last week, where I'm going to take longer to program probably.
Right.
But I'm not feeling the stress of a waiting machine the same way. And so I think I make better choices and it's less overwhelming, just like emotionally overwhelming.
Yeah.
Which is a funny thing to bring into it, but I think it does really affect my quality of work. and how quickly I get through all of the different processes in the day.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to bring like the human lens to it of like, if you're not under severe pressure from the process in front, how does that affect the worker in the process?
Yeah, I was actually watching a bunch of footage of production of cars in Toyota factories, which is just available on YouTube, which is kind of cool. And I was kind of curious, like, it does seem mentally sort of stressful. Like, you really have a certain amount of time, or you are stopping the line, and they are hustling. I mean, it's not like they're hurrying, but it is on the verge of hurrying. Like,
Sure.
they don't have much slack.
Well, don't they plan for like 5% slack or something? They
I think
the rate of the line is like, what is it, 85-90% of that's like like at 100% capacity?
I thought that was sort of machine time. So like, I think they have machine capacity. They try to keep it around 80 so that they have flex in there and then bring on extra hires to increase.
There's
throughput.
that, but I had recalled that they also slow down their lines just slightly from what they think their maximum capacity could be, to account for the fact that like things are going to happen.
Well, having watched that video, that I don't know what their maximum is, but I mean, it wasn't like they were rushing, but it did seem stressful. And to your point, I think this is exactly kind of the idea, right? Like, as you reduce buffers between processes, that does highlight issues. And so you're having problems of, I think, like, you don't know how much time it's going to take you to program a new part. And there's a ton of variability in that.
Yeah.
And that is also a thing that you could try to fix, which seems difficult and impossible because some parts are like super trivial, 3-axis parts to set up, whatever. Or, really simple. And then others, you need to make a lot of custom fixturing, and then whatever, the first try doesn't work maybe, or
hopefully not.
Right. And like, or you're like, oh, will we need to secure it here? Or is it going to be rigid enough when we're machining? I don't know. So I think
it may be a gutter company scenario where it's just like, because of the variability inherent in the system, you have to build inventory.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the inventory you're talking about isn't crazy inventory, and it's not push inventory, hopefully, right? You're not just going like, okay, I'm going to spend a week on programming random new jobs, and then we'll just have this queue sitting there that we can pull from. It's sort of like, okay, we're down to 1 or 2. I don't know what you're doing, but 1 or 2, and then so I'm going to program
ahead right now.
Yeah, so that's
that
like,
might be in the sweet spot.
I think so, and like, I think moving forward, it would be interesting when everything's flowing really well to go like, okay, we're only going to keep 1 program buffered, or I don't know. But again, there are other considerations of like, there is like, again, this sort of gets to something else, but like, there are switching time realities, right? It's like, I'm already programming. I don't know. I could program 1 or I could program 2 now that I'm in the headspace and I already have the gripper program opened and we have 2 jobs that need to go on this gripper, and I'm already in like the weeds on what M codes do what, and so I don't have to like keep looking that up.
Sure, I guess that.
Then you could also say, well, maybe I need a reference sheet for that, right? Like, I don't know. That doesn't sound outrageous, and it's not a push system, I guess.
No,
and like
that is an interesting thing about. Sorry, I cut you off, but that is an interesting thing about job shop work in general. Is it is inherently pull, because you don't start on something until you have an order from a customer, hopefully.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, like some shops are like, oh, I'm going to make an extra 100 of these. I used to do that some.
Okay.
I have steered away from that. And I think that's been good.
Interesting.
There definitely have been multiple situations where it would have been detrimental because the customer made a change and I would have had a lot of invested time and
they didn't ask you to do that.
They did not ask me to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So that can be risky for sure. So anyway, it is interesting that the job shop environment is inherently pull.
Mm-hmm.
When you try and apply like a strict Kanban pull system to it, it doesn't work because it's just like all of this. I mean, it sort of does. Everything gets triggered.
Right.
And then you work your way through that. But it's not the classic like Kanban flow of like continuous back and forth. And
yes and no. I mean, I guess I think if you're a single person shop, no, but maybe as you grow the team, it becomes more that, because not everyone, like maybe one person is interfacing with the customer and that information then needs to flow to everyone else.
sure.
Right.
Yeah. No, I just mean like a job comes in and
Yeah.
every process in that job is triggered at the beginning.
Is it?
Well, yeah.
I mean, you don't need to cut stock till why is it all triggered at once?
Well, if you imagine it starting at, maybe this is, I'm conceptualizing it wrong, but if you imagine the end being ordering, then it triggers back through like, okay, the part's not done. Then it triggers back to machining. Then it triggers back to setup. Then it would trigger back to
interesting
programming, to saw cutting, to ordering, receiving, all that. So it would just kind of be like along, which isn't necessarily bad. That's kind of actually what I'm planning to do with my job board.
Right. And I think you don't trigger it all at once, right? You trigger it only when it's appropriate to trigger it. Like you're not going to saw cut. If it's going to take you a week to program, you're not going to saw cut on day one. Maybe you'll wait till day 6 or something.
Certainly.
Okay.
But if you're imagining sort of the step in front triggering the step behind, it is triggered because it hasn't been done.
I don't feel like it's triggered though, because
this is triggering.
No, because it wouldn't, like the process upstream, like the process before doesn't know that it needs to produce until the downstream process says, hey, I need you to produce because I'm out of this thing. Yeah. Right. So theoretically it will all need to happen, but it's all not necessarily triggered all at once. Maybe we're saying the same thing.
I think it is, if you imagine it in a conventional Kanban system where, like if you put it in your system where it's like because there is no inventory in the process.
Got it. So maybe I'm thinking of other jobs as that sort of inventory. Maybe. Yeah. Right. Like if something's tied up on a machine, you're not going to run a second job on that one machine.
Sure. Like that. If you're looking at the shop as a whole. Okay. But if you're thinking of the job as
I see what you're saying.
A discrete
that
process.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I think like decoupling processes, figuring out where to have buffers is a big part of making sure everything's running smoothly. And then the second everything is running smoothly, you can start to drop those buffers, and like programmed jobs would be a buffer. But yeah, and then the end goal is definitely to link processes, right? To have one have no room for a buffer and just immediately feed into the next process. And that's sort of where like machines, I think Toyota says that machines, like an idle machine is 5 times cheaper than an idle person.
Yeah.
I think it's the number, which feels machines are really expensive. So it's sort of hard to wrap your head around, I feel like, a little bit. But yeah, so I think like that's where that would come in, right? Like having everything feed one into the next, and like we don't on everything.
I think the thing to keep, at least in my circumstance, with that idle machines versus idle people scenario is, is keeping in mind that like, I think the assumption in that statement is that you are still producing product at the rate of demand.
Yes.
If you're producing product at the rate of demand, an idle machine is better than an idle person. But if idle machines are the bottleneck in your ability to produce a product, right. I think that's just a very important
that's true
point
and
to make.
Yeah. If they are very expensive and financing is hard and all that, then it's a good chance that a lot of shops have that constraint of not having just like excess machine time sitting around, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think, I agree with the statement and
also
yes, and in context, yes.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I think that's always an interesting consideration. I just had an issue where we have one Kanban on our pins for assembling the bodies, and we ran out of pins. And all of production ground to a halt. We couldn't ship anything. I mean, you can't assemble a buckle without a pin.
How did that happen?
We have basically we just produced lack of production leveling would be one. Like we aim to produce 30 buckles a day.
Yeah.
At the moment, and we went over that because I have part-time help in the shop.
Uh-huh.
And so instead of going and doing that assembly myself on, like, say day 1 I have help, day 2 I don't have help, sometimes I'll try to do like 60 on day 1 so that I don't have to do any the next day, which is the opposite of production leveling. And it really messes with all the Kanban levels.
Uh-huh.
If you just like rip through a ton of stuff.
Interesting.
And that's sort of what caused the issue. So there's a few solutions to that problem. One is to be more diligent about production leveling and just making sure we produce the same number every day.
Uh-huh.
Or add inventory, essentially. But it also points to an issue at our machining stage where there's just too much of a queue there. And I'm not sure why that is. One option would be to make the Kanban quantities lower, but have more Kanbans such that...
Just like you did for the...
Yeah.
Was it just bodies or was it bodies?
It was
and
everything.
Cams? It was everything.
Yeah. Except pins, actually. Pins. Oh, so maybe that's what I need to do, is split that quantity into 2. Right now it's a trigger for 72 and we only have 2. We have 1 extra bin. But that's a good point. If we had more Kanbans with fewer pins with each Kanban, then when it would get interspersed into our production schedule more appropriately and on a more level basis.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's sort of funny because I wonder if there's I wonder if it's beneficial to have similar Kanban quantities for like one product family, such that everything gets replenished in a similar fashion. I mean, I guess all of them are coming off the mill, but if we had, like, we do buy springs, custom springs, and those we're not going to Kanban by 32.
Sure.
We order, I think, 3,000 or 3,500 at a time.
Yeah. I think, that kind of goes back to the idea, which, like, you get away from, I think we, like, actively get away from the idea when we go to single piece flow of, like, dedicated fixtures that have, everything of a part family on it.
Uh-huh.
But there are certainly some advantages to that sort of workflow where every time you hit start on the machine, everything you need for one is produced.
Is that not single piece flow-y?
It is, but it's not single piece. It's many piece flow.
It's sort of single assembly flow.
Yeah, and it's fixture based,
right?
Or pallet based.
I have been super tempted, which we've discussed, is to add more vices to the machine such that it can machine one of each part in that order. One body, one cam, one pin. One body, one cam, one pin, instead of 32 bodies, 40 cams and then 72 pins, and then you're doing that.
Sure.
So
in theory, the Kanban management system should over time just level that out. So I think the only thing to be wary of is that if your scrap rates are variable, then you end up in a situation where you overproduce whatever has a low scrap rate and you underproduce whatever has a high scrap rate. And excuse me, the answer could be to fix your scrap rates, but sometimes that is very challenging.
I am having that with paint.
I think that also has some downsides, and then it becomes hard to decouple those where you produce only what you need of the one thing. So I think they both have advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
I like the idea of single piece flow because of that sort of flexibility and not having a lot of things tied together that should not be.
Right. For example, the issue, like, we're having an issue with the 1-inch bodies with the gripper, just, something happened and they're now not whatever. So we don't have to stop production on everything to fix that problem. Right.
Yeah.
And we can kind of buy a little bit of flex there just by producing other stuff while we're figuring out how to fix the problem.
I think that's pretty key.
Yeah, that was the huge issue with, to me, like, tombstones and big fixtures is just like, the efficiency is so based on all of them running well, and then like one pocket stops running well, and you kind of have to, do I scrap this whole fixture? Do I make, do I just not produce that one part on the fixture?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Slight tangent, but sort of related. I really try and avoid running parts across multiple machines for sort of similar reasons of being able to, just of the idea of decoupling, of not having things linked that don't necessarily need to be.
Right.
So
and I imagine scheduling becomes a huge headache.
Scheduling becomes a nightmare. Yeah. Things just necessarily start sitting longer.
Interesting.
And the big place that it's like my case study sort of for like single piece flow versus batch work is our lathe, because it only has a single chuck. And so basically everything that we run on that, assuming we need to do backside work, which is most parts, gets batched, where we run all of op 1 and then we set up for op 2 and run all of op 2. And
when you say all, if you got an order for like 10,000 parts,
probably not in that case. Yeah.
So there's some sweet spot, which probably has something to do with setup time.
Yeah, it would be setup time.
Yeah.
But I would say the majority of what we do on that machine, we run that way.
So I think that's the concept of economical batches, which is as your batches increase, your setup time per part goes down.
Yeah.
And then as your batch size increases, your issues associated with inventory increase, of like, where am I putting it? If we have a defect, that's all built in. And so those lines cross, and that's an economical lot size.
Yeah.
And then that goes away with SMED, single minute exchange of dies.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we try and balance that, but pretty much everything on the mill, we run finished part every cycle.
Oh, cool.
And it's just like extremely noticeable how much longer the jobs take on the lathe. Not because lathe jobs take longer, but because of the stock sitting and batching. And it's quite, it's stark, I guess.
It was very interesting the other day, speaking of that batch style work and how time consuming it is. When we ran out of pins, it was sort of like, okay, all hands on deck to get pins back on the machine. And I just realized like our batch size is 72. So normally I like go to the bandsaw and cut 72 pin blanks. And then I take them over to our fixture and I drop them, 72 of them, into the fixture. And then I set it up on the machine. You know, normally that's done while something else is running. But this time...
This is a you grip or grab them.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
So the fixture is just the tray.
The tray, sorry. Yeah. But it was so tempting in doing that. It was like I cut them in groups of 3. So I cut one, I'd pass it to Solo, who would load it into the tray. And it was like, oh yeah, like this is where all those batch delays come in. Like if I had sat there cutting all of the pins, and this was just such a visible example of that,
yeah, totally,
he would have been idle. Or, you know, the whole like front to back time, even though it was less efficient for me to stop every cut and pass him the pins I had just cut, it was more efficient in terms of the goal, which is getting parts shipped.
Yeah.
Right. So it was interesting.
Yeah, it's quite intriguing. It's just an interesting concept of how do we tie or link versus unlinked, or like how tightly linked.
Yeah, and like I constantly have this, and it's so inconsequential, but it still is something I think about just theoretically. Again, on the pins, it's very tempting to have one batch of pin stock always cut, right? So like it would trigger at the saw. Every time we ran pins, it would trigger out the saw. But we run them every, 2 days-ish, 2-3 days, 2.5 days, I guess. And so is it good to have a whole bunch of labor sitting in a drawer for 2.5 days when I can just see that pins are the next thing to be machined and go, okay, now it triggers, right? Like that would be better. Anyway, again, pretty inconsequential, but also just I think fun to think about.
Yeah, it would have to do with personnel availability, right? So probably if you're fitting in that sawing when you have time,
I never have time.
Having it sit for 2.5 days is probably superior than you having to interrupt something that is also critical at the moment that it has to happen.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll have to run an experiment.
Yeah.
Right on. You want to run into your spreadsheet and kind of that general theme?
Sure. So this is something I've been thinking about lately, or over the bunch of years, I guess. Just thinking about sort of, I think a lot of stuff is talked about as like quality of life improvements, and that's how I used to think about it. And I made this spreadsheet the other day, just in thinking through this, to kind of look at like, if you spend say 30 minutes a day on making improvements, and those improvements on average save you X number of seconds every subsequent day, that time starts to sort of compound. And so just looking at like, if that's what you're doing after 1 year, how does your time saved compare to the time you invested in making those improvements? To start to understand like how much time do I need to be saving with the improvements, or anyway, so on and so forth. So it's very interesting. Basically, if you're working 5 days a week and there's 50 working weeks in the year, say, then basically if you spend 3 minutes on an improvement, the time you need to save
3 minutes per day, or
3 minutes
total
on an improvement, which is probably unrealistic. Like you'd probably batch those, right? Do like a few of those. But if you save 1 second every subsequent day on average, at the end of 1 year, you will have saved 8.6 hours, or 8.7 if you round, and you will have you will have spent 12.5 hours. So that doesn't quite break even. So, but then basically what the spreadsheet lets you do, and
how does the 12.5 hours come in?
Oh, sorry. You spent 3 minutes on each improvement, and they each saved you 1 second every subsequent day. And so you spent 12 and a half hours in a year on your improvements.
This is 3 minutes per. This is an improvement every day
that you spent 3 minutes on, and it saved you 1 second. So basically, each one needs to save you 1.5 seconds such that at the end of 1 year, now if every 3 minutes you spent saves 1.5 seconds every subsequent day, at the end of 1 year, you will have saved 13 hours and spent 12.5 hours. So you're slightly ahead.
Yeah.
The interesting thing comes in when you bump that number to like 3 years. So now if you're doing that for 3 years, your hours saved are 117 hours, and the hours spent on improvements are 37 hours. So
it starts to work.
It starts to just, and that kind of made me realize it's like, how long do you plan on being in business for, right? If it's under a year, maybe don't do improvements, right? And I think that's sort of the flaw in my thinking. Was just not a long enough time horizon. Like previously, it was sort of like, okay, this thing is really annoying. I'm just going to fix it for me, right? And that's sort of where this idea of like quality of life improvement comes from. I feel like,
sure,
it's just like I struggle with this every day. I'm just going to stop and fix it, and it's going to be so nice to do. But I think like calling it quality of life improvement, unless it's strictly that, I think misses like the urgency of doing this, investing the time in continuous improvement, because if you're not doing it and someone else is, like they're coming to eat your lunch, right? Like there's no way at the end of year 1, they've broken even and now it's all cake, right?
Sure.
Now
yeah.
They're just way ahead. And like, if you look at the results companies are achieving through some method of continuous improvement, it's like by year 3, they're like tripling their profits. I mean, not across the board, but on the low end, it's sort of like 15% increase in profits, right? Like that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's in a margin where 15 to 30%, or sorry, in a market or business where 15 to 30% is kind of like sweet spot.
Right.
That's huge.
It's huge. And it means that they can bid lower on everything. Like they've just shaved a ton of slack out of the system. They can bid lower. They can turn parts around faster. They can, their defect rate is lower. Their machine downtime is lower. Like all this stuff, because you start to realize, like in in pulling slack out of your system, it's like, wow, we really need to stay on top and make sure that our machine doesn't go down, right? Like that's starts to be more and more important. Anyway, so yeah, so I think like there's that. I think there's just a level of urgency and sort of business sense that is like, this is sort of an imperative in my opinion, and like you sort of can't afford not to, but everyone does, and I mean, at this point the secret is out, but the secret was out since like the 80s, right? So it's
60s, 70s,
yeah, like. So it's sort of funny, like most people aren't doing this, but if you do it, it's very powerful. And I think it goes well beyond just being a quality of life improvement to like something we really, really need to be doing if you're serious about being in business. And at the end, like what is the end game for like your shop, right? I think a lot of shops, looking at sort of reading around on the internet, sort of like when you're done sort of grinding on this, you'll liquidate your tools, they'll sell for some amount of money, and that's kind of it, right? Like you made some money, you sell off your tools.
Sure.
Some shops make the jump of like building a system that can go on and that retains value as a machine that produce, right? And like all of that too has to do, I think, with focusing on systems and focusing on documentation and all this stuff that like you have to put in the time, right? It's not like, okay, well, we want to sell the business in a year, so let's start documenting how we're doing everything. Right. And it's like, you can try that, but I don't know how successful it'll be. And like, I came sort of from the startup world, and they're like in sort of like, when someone wants to buy a company, they want to buy like a sausage machine, right? It's like, hey, crank this handle and you get sausage. They don't want to buy a nebulous sort of poorly documented
idea.
Yeah. And like,
we have idea about sausage.
Right. And like people want to sell their customer list and people want to sell their whatever. And it's like, yes, that has a little bit of value, but not a ton. That said, if you do spend the time, like this is sort of like getting to age 55 and going like, I think I want to retire soon, so I'm going to start saving money. Right? It's like everyone tells you like, there's all those whatever on TikTok or whatever. It's like, did you know that if you put 50 cents in a bank account every week or every day or whatever the number is, by 65, you're going to have like $1.5 million. I'm making those numbers up. I have no idea if that's correct. And I think the issue is this. So on the flip side, so we put in 3 years and it's huge. If we put in like a week, right? Like, what is that? 0.2? No, that's 0.02, whatever the number is. I mean, when you start getting into those low numbers, and this is, I think, why no one's doing it. So at the end of 0.02 years, which is, which is basically a week, you will have spent 15 minutes on improvements, and you will have saved 0.005 hours on
that specific task.
So when you're looking ahead at your week and you're like, wow, we have so much to do, we're a small business, like we gotta ship parts, we gotta do all this, every time you're looking out a week or 3 weeks, it makes zero sense to take that time to make improvements. And I think that's the issue.
I think it does, like on this, like, via this number crunching model.
Yeah.
And I think that is what a lot of people default to. I want to just like add the kind of the human aspect back in.
Yeah.
Which, because I am, largely in that scenario you're talking about, or
right.
have been. But I think it doesn't quite account for, and maybe this is something that could be included, but I'm not sure how you would quantify it. It doesn't quite account for the kind of lowered stress of everybody in the shop.
100%.
And how much less friction there is generally. So I think, even if on a week time scale, that particular task only saved a small percentage of what you spent, I do think already I'm seeing just things run smoother.
Yeah, I think, and beyond that, I mean, people are more engaged in their work typically, like better retention, keeping your employees.
I think we can't throw the quality of life, quote unquote, completely out with the bathwater, because I think it is an important aspect. I think it's just when you focus on that as the only aspect or the only motivating feature, I think that does miss the point. I think you have to say, like, we have to do this to survive as a business. Also, we have to retain our people to survive as a business. And we make better profits when our people are happy with their work.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, it's multi.
Yeah, I think the quality of life comes into it. It just feels like it's writing it off as this thing that's like
sort of trivial or like touchy-feely.
Right. It's like, oh, I would love a new office chair that's like has a headrest. I don't know. It's like, great.
And it turns out that like chiropractic bills are expensive.
Right. And like, there's just like, no, you have to get a chair with a headrest because like, you're not going to be standing up every 15 minutes to stretch your back or whatever. Like, I'm making it up, but like, it's not sort of just this nice to have. It's like, you need to be spending this time. And then when you zoom out a little bit to like just global trade and like, if I don't know, if like US manufacturing, I feel like in this world is something people talk a lot about.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see such an emphasis on driving down waste or like increasing efficiency, right? Like a hellbent, we are going to eliminate all the waste from the system. It's sort of like, I don't know. I just feel like I see a lot of this mentality of kind of like go to work, like this idea of grinding even is sort of antithetical, right? It's like,
don't like it.
It's like, why are we grinding? Why aren't we taking some time to think about, okay, how can we solve some of these things that are just like doing the grind right now? Like, oh man, I'm doing like, really grinding on sales right now. I'm just calling so many people. It's like, okay, can you automate that? Can you
figure out
outsource it? Yeah. Can you get a better like top of funnel customer list that's going to yield like a better conversion rate? I don't know. So like all that stuff.
It does seem the American mentality and maybe American manufacturing in general is like, we have might, we will just beat our heads against this until we persevere.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, coming out of World War II, like we were such a powerhouse. I just feel like it's easy to become a little bit complacent.
Yeah.
And then we basically, I mean, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but it just seems like we exported to cheaper labor. But now there's sort of a realization that that's not necessarily the whole picture, right? Like along with that come longer lead times, which means bigger batch sizes, which means more storage, inventory, cost of making changes, issues with defects, like all this stuff that starts to, at the end of the day, like I've worked with a bunch of companies who are sort of reshoring things, right?
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and it's like maybe not their whole production, but maybe some really critical element that is something they just want more control over. Because once you look at like airfare to fly back and forth to the factory to do checks and QC, problem solving and whatever, it's like, Anyway,
I got multiple jobs in the last couple of years that have turned out to be ongoing.
Interesting.
From that.
Yeah. I just quoted someone. It was basically the same price as offshoring it in the quantities they were doing, and and even if it's slightly like more, I can ship them much smaller batches, and it makes sense for everyone, right? They don't need the cash flow squeeze of like buying a huge order and all that stuff. So, which sort of leads me into, I guess,
small versus fundamental.
Yeah. So like, I think the cool thing about, so you can also say, okay, in 30 minutes of improvements, you need to save some number of minutes, right, per day in perpetuity for that to pay off. But I think something to keep a focus on in doing that. So like when you're making tiny improvements, it's cool because like bending over to pick up your cord to plug in your computer, like that's worth fixing. Like it brings a lot of things into focus that seem really small, but then in a bigger way, like if you can get a lot of them, it's your quality of life will just be so much no, it'll really pay off. But I think the important piece to keep in view is sort of like, are we making small improvements, sort of like polishing a bad process? Like just staying aware of the fact, like, are there process improvements we could make that are like fundamental? So like, rather like if you're leaning over to look to figure out where to plug in your USB cord, that's probably a second and a half instead of like having it marked on top so you don't have to bend to the side, right?
There's a funny joke about the guy who invented the USB cord.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
When he died, they lowered him down into his grave, and then they took him back out and turned the casket around and lowered him back in again.
Yeah. So, right. So like you can say, okay, well, let's mark my computer so I don't have to bend to the side, and that would be a worthy improvement. But then make it Pokeyoke or like USB-C, you can plug in either way.
Sure.
And then even better maybe is like Bluetooth, which just automatically connects and you don't have to lean over, although sometimes it doesn't automatically connect. But right, like just make, and then even more fundamental would be like, why are we using a mouse to begin with? Like, what are we clicking on? What are we highlighting? Like,
yeah,
right, and making sure you're not just sort
polishing a series of bad steps.
Yeah, right. So I think that's all worth mentioning.
Which hopefully, like the lean single piece flow process will highlight. In a perfect world, it will highlight those awful steps.
Yeah, I think as you like drive inventory down, and then it's like, this is taking a while. Why is it taking a while? I think
when you get to the point in your business where whether you put your USB in right or wrong is the
you're
bottleneck.
Really lean.
You're doing really good.
Yeah, got to pull that end-on cord. I went to plug in my mouse one too many times. Two other pieces, like you mentioned, the human element. I think like there's also something to keep in mind, which is that we all need to get better at thinking about and making improvements. Like I feel like I'm getting better all the time, right? Of just like getting a better understanding of what's going to be worthwhile or what types of improvements are more impactful. And so I think like everyone needs to have that time. So if people are given time every day, which I think they should be, or every week or whatever the kind of the thing is, like they're not going to be that good at making those improvements to begin with. But I think you have to kind of let them fail to get it.
Yeah.
To get good. And I know I've failed a whole bunch of like, oh, I'm going to do this. And you're like, I just spent like $300 on this thing. And like, maybe it was an improvement, but I bet there were a bunch of things that would have cost like $1 or $5 or something.
Sure.
Something I've noticed more broadly is just, well, we could go through some of the improvements we made this week, but just like as we've improved a bunch of processes that have sort of driven down essentially setup times. And it's interesting because with all of them, I just noticed that things end up being like single piece flow sort of just because it makes sense, not because I've read TPS or whatever, right? Like you don't have to, like we switched from like pliers to press the pin, like a, like Nipex plier wrench kind of thing.
Yeah.
To a little hand press that just sits there. And just the fact that like before you'd have to reach, like Thurblig, Thurblig analysis. It's basically like, what was his name? Something Gerbreath in like, anyway, basically broke down motions into, I think there's 18 Thurbligs, which are basically like transport your, like search with your eyes, find with your eyes, transport your hand empty, grasp, transport your hand loaded, whatever. Like you do the thing. And like every single piece of that takes time. And like there's a saying that like time is the shadow of motion or something. And so it's like you have to eliminate movement to save time unless you're just having people rush. But basically in eliminating that reach, pick up whole step with just the hand press, now like we assemble a buckle. Before we'd sort of build up a small pile if they were like 10 of the same color and then press them all. Now it just like makes sense to just press them and drop them in the bin, which is kind of cool to see.
That's sweet. And
that's just like driving down setup times. And seeing that across the board. We just made a tiny improvement to the press where the handle doesn't fall every time. So it just sits in the correct position. And it's like,
sweet.
There's a little piece of wire. Yeah.
Love it. Those little things also that are like, I stuck some tape here.
Yeah.
And now it's better.
Yeah. So in that spreadsheet, I have to say in the last week, I've really been focusing on just really cheap, fast improvements.
Yeah.
Like color coding our setup pans, because I noticed you'd walk over to the rack and sort of do a bunch of sort of like, no, not this one. Oh, not that one. Like just kind of, it was hard to find stuff.
Yeah.
Hard to find as in like would take like 5 extra seconds or something.
Yeah. That just jogged my mind that I probably need to start making color coded tray tags.
Oh yeah. Cool.
I finally ordered red and green filament, which I hadn't. I just when I bought the 3D printer, it came with a bunch of filament. I just kind of used
right.
And it was time to order some, so And I was like, what colors do I want? Well, I'll get red like we had and blue like we had. And then I was like, red and green. Probably should make that happen. But I think we've been printing these tray tags. I think a good improvement would be to have a simple one would be like red for things that are not done, green for things that are done and good.
Right.
And red could be like, this is with scrap or something.
Yeah. And I bet just like
part or something.
the reduction in ambiguity and just like every time you walk up to a sheet pan and go like, wait, what state is this in? Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is all waste and just like cheap improvements instead of those improvements. It's like, okay, we could buy a new machine for $10,000. That's going to really like, we just bought a sandblaster for $3,000 basically landed.
Yeah.
And it made sense for a variety of reasons. Like our old sandblasting cabinet was Harbor Freight and was leaking abrasive in a CNC shop, which just seems really short-sighted. So like it was time to change it anyway, but that saves us 10 minutes a day, which is big.
Yeah.
But I bet we could spend a tenth that amount of money on an assortment of small improvements around the shop, like color coding things, labeling things, and shave a similar amount of time.
Yeah, the idea of like eliminating ambiguity, super critical. I could talk about one little thing I did this last week. It was not a huge thing, and it's very obvious looking back, but I just made like organizer bins for our tool influx. And
what do you mean influx?
So we're always getting new tools.
Okay.
Some of them are standard tools that are repeat orders based on our Kanban system. Some of them are new tools for a new job, a custom thing, whatever. We don't have a great drill selection, so that's always being updated and added to.
Right.
And Ariel and I had talked about kind of like how we wanted to structure this flow and who would be responsible for what.
Oh, cool.
But that was like a year ago, and I never like took the next step of like nailing it down and making it or I haven't even documented the process necessarily, but even just like making specific places for something.
Yeah.
So I just made bins that was like when we don't want to leave a bunch of full packages sitting around the shop. They take up a lot of space.
Right.
So we tend to unpackage as soon as we get a new box of tools. But then the question was, where do these go? And who knows what they're for? Generally it's me, because I do most of the ordering. And so they would just end up somewhere, on some surface somewhere. And I'd be like, that's that tool. That's for this job. So now I just like, I made a bin that's like all new incoming tools go here. And then right next to that bin is the bin with all of the Kanban cards that were ordered standard tools.
Oh, cool.
So you can very quickly just go through that. And if it matches a Kanban card that exists already, you can just sort and put it away, get it out of the way.
Okay.
There's also new blank Kanban cards there that you can use to create a new bin if it's going to become a new standard, which will require some communication.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a bin for tools that have been used but are not yet standards. So like if we got tools, they didn't go through that Kanban card process. They went straight to a machine.
Mm-hmm.
They can go into the used, like to be sorted bin.
Very cool.
And so, just trying to make it, and it's all marked, so it's not ambiguous. And we just kind of discussed like who's vaguely responsible for what. There's still a lot of overlap as we dial in the system. But at least there's like cards labeled, pens, the essentials.
That's awesome.
And then we kind of did the same for our tool tags because it's all of a feather. It's kind of similar adjacent process.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember reading something in, I forget which book. It was I think it was the Toyota production system. He was like, I think I mentioned this, but if you spend $500 to eliminate a worker, you'd say that that's a huge win. But if you could spend $0 and eliminate a worker by just rearranging the shop or reordering how you're doing it, like you're like $500 is all waste, right? It's interesting. The small improvements are big.
Yeah. I guess I could also jump into, I don't know if it quite qualifies as an improvement. It was more of a necessity.
Okay.
But in adding the new machine, which is now officially up and running.
Oh, very cool.
Yay.
Congrats.
Don't have to go too much into detail about why it was not my fault. I'll leave it at that. But with another spindle eating air and my my cobbled together air system, which basically when I first put this shop together, the only CNC machine I had was a Bridgeport converted, like a converted Bridgeport Nemo.
Not a ton of air.
Not a ton, no, not a ton of air. At that point, like the idea of me having a shop full of VMCs was like inconceivable, like absolutely 100% inconceivable. And it's kind of funny how many times that's happened in this business journey of being like, I'm at this spot that I thought was inconceivable.
Interesting.
Anyhow, so when I first set up the air system, it was very minimal and low capacity. And then as it has failed, I have just kind of like added things in here and there.
Amen to that.
Yeah. And so it failed again. And this way, basically we were getting low air pressure alarms on one of the machines specifically. There were some mitigating factors. Like I think our air drain was clogging. And so occasionally it would just be like dumping air.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that was part of it, but that wasn't the root cause. So we rerouted our entire air system yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big project. A lot of up and down ladders. I don't have to go too into the weeds, but instead of having, I had like a 5 horsepower piston compressor.
Right.
When that finally took a dump like 3 times in a week, I impulse bought a Kaiser. Yeah. The one they had on sale didn't have a tank, so I got one without a tank, where the power was not next to the old compressor for a 3-phase. So I put it on the other side of the shop, routed 3/4 inch hose to the tank of the old compressor.
Okay.
Turned off the old compressor, and then used the same outgoing line and air dryer and everything. And it was just kind of like this maze of 1/2-inch pecs through the shop. Lots of like T's and T's and T's and then T's off of T's. Okay. So now we cut all that out. We have a 3/4 inch line that goes from the compressor directly to the air dryer, like in a matter of feet. And then a 3/4 inch line that goes through the center of the shop all the way to the tank. And then along that 3/4 inch line is an individual T for every drop.
Oh, cool.
So every hand air blast gun has a drop.
Wow.
And every machine has its own drop. Actually, that's not true. There's 2 air handguns that share a drop. But they're the ones that don't get used as much, and they're not going to throw an alarm if their pressure goes down. So hopefully, knock on wood, that's going to be a very nice improvement.
So now you go from the compressor through the air dryer, and then your tank is at the other end of the system?
It's at the far end, yeah.
Interesting. So dry tank.
Theoretically
dry tank.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think we're going to go away from using the auto drain and just have it be part of our standard shutdown procedure, that we just do a manual valve open for 10 seconds or something at the end of the day. Do
you have an auto drain, or do you have like a smart drain that only triggers when there's water in it?
An auto drain, like on a timer.
Yeah. So they also make smart drains that are just when there's water present. It turns on for like 1/2 second.
Yeah.
They're super efficient.
Is that what you have?
Yeah, it came with the compressor somehow.
Interesting.
Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I have both. Because similarly, I have a cobbled together system that I never fully decommissioned the old and revisited all the choices.
Sure.
So that's on my list.
Yeah, I think it's good. We're about to have a lot more air usage once we start running multiple grippers.
Yeah, those grippers with the vise. I feel like the vise is a huge use, plus the gripper.
Yeah, also we do an air blast every cycle to push the part out of the jaws.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of air used.
A lot of air. I was noticing like on my old compressors when my op 2 on the cam was a big problem because the cycle time was so short that the vise was just moving quite a bit per hour. Yeah. And I think the vise usage, like the old compressors just could not keep up.
Yeah. I'm curious if our compressor, I don't think our compressor is yet the limiting factor. I think it was a buffer. Yeah. A pressure buffer issue.
Interesting. And your air dryer can keep up with the peak CFM of your compressor?
No. Not yet. We're going to see how it works. If we start getting water in the lines,
how will you know?
If we get water in the lines,
like when you blow something off, if there's like water droplets,
or collecting in the little separators at the back of the machines. Gotcha. Probably we'll just order a new one soon. But right now we need it to be running this week.
Right.
So that, but also, if it works, I'm not going to replace it until it doesn't.
That makes sense.
I don't think it limits flow. I think it just doesn't have refrigeration capacity to cool that much air.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
So your dew point.
Yeah.
Go up. Nice. I have, speaking of lowering setup times, with a few things now, I've sort of, like with Toyota recommends asking why 5 times to solve a problem, to sort of solve the root problem. I'm not sure I'm going to 5, but maybe I'm going to 4. So I wanted more training videos around the shop. They're like QR code, like Pearson does a lot of them. I spoke to a few other people about like SOPs, and the problem is like stale SOPs, like any stale systems, the second you have like non-compliance, it's almost worse than just not having an SOP, because like then you get in the habit of just ignoring all the SOPs and just relying back on like tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
Anyway, so wanted to do more training videos. We have a new person starting this week. And if we're going through the time of, investing the time of training, I'm hoping to kind of capture a lot of those trainings in a video so that anyone can get cross-trained, or just as we grow the team, you know. So we got an iPad specifically for the workflow of shooting training videos, making, like uploading them to YouTube and creating QR code stickers.
Yeah.
And kind of just have that software on there. Like that's what it's for. And it was kind of awesome the other day. One of our current guys, we got the new sandblasting cabinet, and he was going to come in early in the morning and run some stuff in it. And he's like, I don't know how to use it. So I just like made a video, stuck it on there. And then he came in the morning, watched it, and did the thing. So
cool.
Very cool. Yeah.
I'll be curious to follow up and hear how that works. I did that early on when I first hired somebody.
Yeah.
And found that maybe it was just my video was terrible, but I found that buy-in was very minimal.
Yeah.
And in having some brief conversations with both of the employees now, I've gotten the impression that written is preferred.
Yeah.
And I'm just, this is a question, an ongoing question of what's a most effective way to tackle this.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, my suspicion is that it's not going to get watched very much.
Yeah.
But I do really think it's important in general to have documentation of what everyone's doing. And my feeling, I hope to encourage people to pick up that iPad anytime they have a workflow that is not documented, record a video and do the whole process. Because like if someone gets, I don't know, they're out sick for a week, and there's just a bunch of stuff they were doing that I have no idea about.
Sure.
Furthermore, I mean, I'm sure you've had this where you run a job that you ran like 6 months ago or a year ago, and you're like,
yeah,
what did I do for this? And then you're like, will this program run? Or did I change something that was like essential?
Yeah.
All that stuff. So like, I think I'm hoping to just, the problem with written stuff is I feel like it turns into a bit of a task. I have a video, I think I've mentioned this, of my like how to file quarterly taxes that I made the first time I did it.
Yep.
And I reference that every time I do it.
It seems like for things that are one time, like an initial training or very rare, I think it makes a lot of sense. For like daily reminders,
interesting.
I feel like maybe
that's probably true. Like who wants to watch a video when it's like, I know how to do it.
Yeah.
I just need like one detail or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a cool distinction, actually. It's worth thinking more about, just like when to do what for documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. We are at an hour, so I think
nice.
We had talked about not doing a full hour, so probably we should wrap it up. Any last things you want to hit before? Oh, I had a question. You mentioned you had a juicy topic for this week. Was that the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay.
Super juicy.
I didn't want to miss out on the juicy topic. Cool. Well, right on. We'll see y'all next week.
Yep. And maybe we'll even upload this.
Maybe this one. Yeah. Look forward to it.
Awesome.
Catch you later.